Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Welcome to another Sunday afternoon Dhamma talk during this Rains Retreat of 2024. So the theme today is if all things are not self, what is reborn? If I remember correctly. So when I saw this as one of the suggested themes for a Dhamma teaching, I thought, well, that's a good one. I'll put my name on that one. This is a question that's been asked since the time of the Buddha himself, and over these 26 centuries, over and over again. It's needed some explanation because these two principles that you find very commonly within the Buddha's teaching, the teaching on not self, sabbe dhamma anatta, all things, all qualities of the experiential world are not self, are anatta, and then also very frequently the principle of rebirth, what's called in Pali is called punabhava. Rebirth is talked about very, very repeatedly, over and over again. So how do these fit together? So I'll offer a few reflections this afternoon, and then there'll be, as usual, time for questions and Dhamma discussion in the second part of the session together. The first thing I like to share is a point that Ajahn Amaro, who's one of the sort of preeminent Dhamma teachers in the English language in the world these days, published many books, and one of the essays, one of the articles that he wrote quite a few years ago, is called "No Self or Not Self." And so, even though it's very regularly stated, or the Buddha said that there is no self, or that this is the teaching on anatta means the Buddha said there is no self, or we are supposed to believe there is no self, or even that we're supposed to believe that we don't exist. That in this very helpful little essay called "No Self or Not Self," Ajahn Amaro points out that you can't find a single place in the whole of the Pali Canon where the Buddha says there is no self. And what you can find is a place where he says, those who hold the opinion that there is no self, that's wrong view. And when he is asked directly, one of his regular visitors, the wanderer called Vacchagotta, who's a wanderer, a yogi from a different spiritual group. On one occasion, he came to ask the Buddha about this, and he said he came to the Buddha, paid his respects, and said, "Is there a self?" And the Buddha remained silent. And then Vacchagotta said, "So is there no self?" And again, the Buddha remained silent. And Vacchagotta was kind of confused by this, and so paid his respects and departed. And so this is quite a famous encounter, even though the Buddha didn't say anything, known as the silence of the Buddha. And that when Ananda, who was always trying to sort of be the Buddha's social secretary and make everything sort of tidy and good and right and arrange things properly, then he was puzzled as well. It's like, why didn't the master answer that question? And so then after Vacchagotta had departed, Ananda spoke to the Buddha and said, "Venerable Sir, why was it when the wanderer Vacchagotta came and asked you, is there a self? And is there no self? Why did you remain silent?" And the Buddha replied to Ananda, said, "Well, Ananda, if when he asked the question, is there a self, if I had said, yes, there is, how would that line up against the many times I've pointed out that all dhammas, all phenomena are not self?" And then, and if when he had asked the question, "Is there no self?" and I had replied saying, "Correct, there is no self," then he would have had the thought, "Oh, I had a self when I came here, and now the master tells me I haven't got one," and he would have gone away even more confused than when he had arrived. So it's a subtle point. But the difference really, and hopefully this is meaningful to people, when we say a phrase like "there is no self," it's taking a philosophical position, like this is something that a person is expected to believe or take to be true. But rather, the principle of anatta, not self, it's not a philosophical belief for us to accept or reject, but rather it's a means of investigation. So when we talk about what we call the three characteristics of existence, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self, anicca, dukkha, anatta, then they're not articles of faith, as it were, or things to believe in, but rather they are ways of investigating our own experience. So anicca, impermanence or uncertainty. So can any aspect of what we feel, see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think, any aspect of the material world, is there any aspect of all of that that is stable and predictable and unchanging? And so it's an encouragement to look, to explore, and then it's found everything is in a state of change, mental, physical. And then unsatisfactoriness is not a sense of trying to make us believe that everything is painful, but rather, can you find any experience, any aspect of the experiential field of what we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, think, that is completely satisfactory, completely pleasing, all the time, permanently, in an absolute permanent way. That no thing, no experience can permanently and completely satisfy. And then, with respect to not self, so can you find any aspect of the body and the mental world that is truly and absolutely who and what you are? Can it truly be said of a thought or of a feeling, sensation, this is mine, this is what I am, this is myself? So these are ways of investigating our experience. And so we say, yeah, well, this is my body. Well, the principle of anatta encourages us to look at that. Well, okay, so if this is my body, what's the thing here that does the owning? How can any aspect of the material world really be owned? And what does that mean to own in any absolute or fundamental way? So it's a means of exploring, of say, looking at our habits, our attitudes, our customary ways of thinking, and challenging that and helping us to let go, to have a more open, more relaxed, more realistic attitude towards things. So I hope, again, there'll be lots of time to ask questions and to discuss things, but I feel that's a very, very helpful principle. So the Buddha certainly did say, all dhammas are not self, all phenomena are not self, sabbe dhamma anatta, but it's that doesn't contradict, or it's not an idea to believe in, but rather it's like a toolkit to examine the habits of thinking that we tend to assume. This is my body, or this is my mind, or this is these are my robes, for example, and say, well, yes and no. We can see how our patterns of thinking are formed. Another aspect of it that I feel is very, very helpful, and we can consider as a sort of central principle of Dhamma practice, is how our habits as human beings is to take things quite personally. My mind, my thoughts, my feelings, my possessions, my family, my home, my monastery. That is ordinary, everyday way of naming things, labeling things. Yes, that's true. But the more that we take things personally and we identify with our thoughts, our feelings, our body, our possessions, and our experiences, then the more we create the causes for alienation, for insecurity, for dukkha, for dissatisfaction. And so much of the practice of the Buddha's way is learning to shift the view from a self-centered perspective to a nature-centered perspective, to what we would call a Dhamma-centered perspective. So that rather than seeing that, this is my body or my mind or my feelings or my thoughts, my ideas, to see, well, this body, these thoughts, these ideas, these feelings, these are all aspects of nature. Just like we can say, this is the Amaravati temple. Well, yes and no. The oaks, the oak pillars that form the structure and the beams, they all came from elsewhere. They were not. Those trees were not growing here on this site on St. Margaret's Lane. They came from far away. The bricks that form the walls, the limestone tiles that form the floor, these all came from far and wide, many different places. They've come together in this form 25 years ago. That was completed, and poof, we call it Amaravati Temple. And then one day all these pieces will come apart and disappear and go their separate ways, hopefully in 1,000 years' time or more, but who knows? So that we call this the Amaravati Temple, but that designation is something that is put together through our thoughts. And so when we change the view from a self-centered perspective to a nature-centered perspective, then the mind is seeing things in a realistic way, and we're not creating those causes for alienation or insecurity, for dukkha, as we call it. So I feel it's a very helpful, simple way of looking at what we mean by practicing the Dhamma or following the Buddha's path, is that shift of view, that shift of perspective, seeing this body, this mind, this world, not in personal terms, but in the terms of nature, seeing things from a nature-centered perspective. So, as part of this, I also feel it's very helpful to consider the structure and this question of if all dhammas, if all things are not self, what is it that's reborn? Then part of that seeing things as not self and seeing things from a nature-centered perspective, one aspect of that is to consider what the Buddha called the niyamas, or the laws of nature. And karma is one of these, the law of action and its results. That's one attribute of this. But in the teachings, you find references to this in a variety of places, and you can put them. If you put them all together, you find there are 5 of these niyamas, or 5 laws that the natural world is structured around. So you can say that what we all experience in this moment, every one of us, is the product of these 5 laws, these 5 principles. So the first one is called Utu Niyama, and that's the laws of physics and chemistry. So we're all experiencing the force of gravity, right? We can feel the weight of our body on the cushion, on the chair. We feel the pull down to the earth. So none of us were involved in creating the force of gravity. That's not a presumption, I think. we were not personally involved in creating that law, right? But we all experience it. We all feel that the weight of the body. It's sensed right now, but it's not personal. We all experience it. It's part of what we're feeling, but it's not personal. So, Utu Niyama, the laws of physics and chemistry. The second one is Bija Niyama. Bija Utu literally means the weather. So, Bija Niyama, Bija means a seed, so the laws of biology. Again, so none of us were involved in inventing aerobic respiration. Breathing in, breathing out, staying alive because of oxygen. None of us were personally involved in creating that, I would say. But we're all breathing. Our bodies are all kept alive by taking oxygen in and breathing out carbon dioxide. It's not a personal thing, but all of our lives, these bodies, are sustained through that process of respiration. So, Bija Niyama, we experience the effects of those laws of biology, the need to breathe, the need to eat, the functions of the body, it's the heartbeat, the organs, and so on. That's all a part of what we are, but it's completely non-personal. So the third one then of the 5 is Kamma Niyama. So this is gets a sort of central position in the Buddha's teaching and in many of our lives. So Kamma means action. And when we use that word, it's often a shorthand for karma vipaka, or action and its results. So the law of karma that we're all experiencing the results of, or the effects of, is, in this respect, personal choices, things that you have decided to do. Like, I have decided to live as a Buddhist monk, so here I am. With these robes and living here in this Buddhist monastery. You have all decided to come to this talk or to visit Amaravati today. And so the experience of being here, hearing these words and sitting in this place is a result of that particular choice. That's the vipaka, the result of that particular intended action. So we are the inheritors of the results of the choices that we make. So, and that's, again, is a major piece in this whole theme that we're looking at today. So then the fourth of the five is called Citta Niyama, the laws of psychology. Like, again, none of us were involved in inventing how memory works, or how imagination works, or how the mind produces emotions, or thoughts, or states of concentration, or states of distraction. The way that the mind works, like physics and chemistry, biology, these are non-personal, but we experience the results of that. Our ability to remember, or our lack of ability to remember. The way the mind works is non-personal. It's according to natural laws. And then the fifth of the five is called Dhamma Niyama. So that's representing the fundamental structure of reality, the conditioned, the unconditioned, the reality at its most fundamental level, in the relationship between different levels of conventional truth, ultimate truth, and so forth. Again, this is non-personal, but we experience that. So when we, in Buddha's teachings, we talk about the realization of the unborn, the uncreated, the unconditioned, and so forth, or realization of Nibbana. Again, no one here created Nibbana, or we're not personally involved in establishing that reality, but it's here as a basis of our experience, the fundamental reality of all things. So, when we look at the laws of nature in that way, then and see that each of us are experiencing the effects of those five laws moment by moment, all day, every day. But we focus upon karma niyama. We focus upon my choices, where I'm sitting, what I've chosen to wear, who I have come to visit with, where I've chosen to sit in the hall. We focus on those things that we do have a personal choice, but we're affected by the whole range. So then, with the area of karma vipaka, or karma, one of the things that is very significant is how, and not just from the Asian perspective, but in the Western world as well, there can be a lot of superstition around karma. And it's taken as a kind of fate or destiny, or a sort of a fixed outcome, and so that can be very rigid in people's minds, and we'll talk about that. So when we use the word karma, Pali, or karma, Sanskrit, it doesn't mean a predestination or fate, or in any kind of fixed way, shape, and form. Rather, it's again, it's helpful to get a feeling for what the Buddha's teaching means in this respect. It really means action and its results, what's done and the results that come from that, so that there isn't an absolute fixity, a determinism around that. And as is pointed out, it's because things aren't predestined or predetermined. This is why there's a possibility of liberation. And many times in the Buddha's lifetime, he was asked questions about this area, and some philosophers or teachers of his time had that view that everything is, karma is, it just appears that we're making choices, but it's all predestined, it's all prearranged, and it's just like a ball of thread that unravels, and none of us really have any choices about anything. And the Buddha said, no, that's not it. And then other people say, actually, it's completely random. It seems like we're making choices and experiencing the results of it, but really it's all just completely unpredictable and random, and we just think there's an orderliness to it, but actually it's completely chaotic. And the Buddha said, no, it's not that way either. There's a causal relationship between one event and another, one pattern and another. You can't say that it's completely random, and you can't say that it's completely fixed. And because actions do have a result, but those results are not 100% definable, that is why liberation is possible. And again, we can talk about this kind of area when we have time for questions and discussions. But I feel that's a very well made point that the Buddha had to explain over and over again. If everything was predetermined, liberation would be impossible. If everything was chaotic, liberation would be impossible. But because things condition each other, there's a causal relationship, what they call indapachayata, there's a causal connection between things. That's why liberation is possible. And so, and over again, he tried to clarify this and explain this. So in terms of the what we call the rebirth process, then there's a few teachings that are very helpful in this respect. So that teaching, the one-way dialogue between the Vajragota and the Buddha, that you find in the connected discourses. There's a number of dialogues with Vajragotas. That's in section 44, sutta number 10. Sutta number 9 is this interesting teaching that the Buddha gives about this. So Vajragota came to see the Buddha many, many times and had lots of good questions. That's why we've got a whole collection of teachings around Vajragota. So anyway, he comes to the Buddha and said, so when a being has passed away in one life and then before they are born again in another life, what is it that sustains a being from one life to the next? This is Vajragota asks the Buddha that. How does that work? And then the Buddha gives this very interesting analogy, this simile. He says, it's like a forest fire. When you have a fire raging through a forest, and then you can see the flames jumping from one tree to the next. What is it that sustains the fire from one tree to the next tree? He says it's the air. The flames feed upon the air. So he knew about oxygen. And the Buddha knew how flames worked. So it's the air is the fuel that sustains that flame as it leaps from one tree to another. And so in exactly the same way, when the life of a being has come to an end, and before the next life has begun, what sustains that being, he uses the word tanupadana. And interestingly enough, the word upadana means clinging, but it also means fuel. Like firewood, or you would say oil, is fuel, that which burns. So it means clinging, or attachment, and it also means fuel. And tanha means craving. So he says craving is the fuel, or attachment, clinging. Craving is the fuel. That's what sustains a being from one life to the next. And so in terms of what is it that's reborn, then using this kind of language that the Buddha applies, that gives us a bit of a hint. So that it's like the mixture of the flame in one tree, the air in between, and then the flame catching the fuel of the next tree. So it gives us a bit of a hint, and what I was saying about a causal relationship. So it's not exactly the same flames that go from one tree to the next, but the fire conditions the flames to continue because there's more fuel. Just like when you see the flame on a candle, it's not the same flame. The flame is changing all the time, but you can see the candle sitting there, and the flame is maybe quite steady as the wax of the candle burns away. So it's a different flame, but it looks the same. And as long as there is fuel in the candle, the flame will sustain itself. And when the fuel runs out, then the flame goes out. So one of my favorite ways of describing this Again, I'm not sure everybody quite gets the point. It depends a little bit on remembering your physics lessons from school or college, or maybe a few of your lecturers or teachers of physics. So that, say for example, you're standing on a beach, and then you're watching a wave forming out in the open water of the sea and then rolling into the shore. Right? I'm sure most people here have at some point stood on a beach and watched the waves coming in. So it's not too much to assume, I hope. So you stand on the beach and you see a wave forming, and then one after another, the waves move in from out in the open water and they roll into the shore and they break on the shore, right? The beach. So it looks like there is a ridge of water that is out there, maybe a couple of 100 yards out into the sea, and you see a ridge of water coming closer and closer and closer and closer until it breaks on the beach and the wave comes to an end on the shore. So it looks like there is a single body of water moving into the land, right? But, again, this is where your physics lessons come into play, but actually, it's not one single ridge of water that's moving towards you. It's a wave of energy moving towards you on the shore. And the water molecules are actually moving in a kind of circular or a kind of oval motion and in the water, so that it looks like a ridge of water is coming towards you, but the molecules of water are actually moving in a circular form, and it's the wave of energy that is coming towards the shore. I hope that makes sense. So the appearance is there is that body moving in this direction, and it's sustaining itself. The wave doesn't suddenly change shape or vanish. It sustains itself because of the energy moving through it, and then it rolls into the beach, and then the wave breaks up. So that there's a causal relationship between the movement of that set of water molecules, and as the energy moves in from the open water to the beach, then it looks like it's moving along. So we can look at our lives, our bodies, in the same way. This is our bodies are like a moving wave. And many of you who came this morning will have eaten the fine food that was prepared and offered, the dana. So the bodies that we have, those of us living here at Amaravati, the bodies that we had at breakfast time are not the same as the bodies we have now. They're like the way they're constantly picking up molecules and shedding them. We are breathing in and out. We've been taking in oxygen, breathing out carbon dioxide ever since we came into this hall. Our bodies are in a constant state of change. There's a certain integrity. My body doesn't suddenly become like Ajahn Amaro, kind of suddenly sort of switch bodies. There's an integrity to the shape of the wave, but the bodies that we have are constantly integrating, disintegrating. The molecules arrive and depart, and there's a certain, say, matrix or an integrative quality that makes our bodies come together according to certain patterns, and that they sustain themselves to a degree, like a wave is changing a little bit as it rolls in, but the main form is sustaining itself. So that it looks as though there's a single wave coming into the shore, but it's changing all the time. We look like we're the same person that we were a few weeks ago, but these bodies are changing all the time. Our minds are changing all the time. And so I would say, again, this echoes the sense there's a causal relationship between where things have begun, or where they are seen to start from, and how we experience them now, and what they're going on to. So that that analogy of the wave, and it's again representing that what we call the again becoming, the punabhava, that one moment is conditioning the next, conditioning the next, conditioning the next. Another analogy that the Buddha gave when he was asked this question, like when someone said, "So, a being who lived in a previous life and a being that is existing now, are they the same person or are they different? If I remember a previous life, am I the same person now as I was then, or am I completely different?" And the Buddha, in this way of responding to that question, says, well, if you think of yourself when you were an infant, you were 1 year old, are you the same person as you were when you were 1 year old, as you are now? Or are you completely different? And he said, well, I'm neither completely the same nor completely different. The Buddha said, exactly. There's a causal relationship between the infant and the adult. So, if you fell over and cut your leg and got a scar when you were 2 years old, there'll still be a scar on your leg when you're an adult right now. I cut my foot quite badly the first week I arrived at Wat Pah Nanachat in January of 1978. I still have a scar on my foot. that mistake that I made, cutting a hole in my foot, though I'm not 21 years old anymore, the scar is still there. So the way it was in the earliest time affects what is present now. You can't say they're completely separate, and you can't say that they're exactly the same. There's a causal relationship. So thinking of that, working with that analogy, then in terms of what is reborn, and this question, if all things are not self, what is reborn is that which is the mind is attached to, that which has been acted upon, we can say, the choices that have been made, wholesome, unwholesome, or things that are familiar, what is just we feel at home with, what seems has been effective in our life, the particular smells around the home or where we grew up, or the particular sounds in the environment where we grew up, the tone of a voice of our parents or of a sibling that we might have got accustomed to. So it's not just the personal choices that the mind is affected by, but also what it has experienced, what is familiar, what is well known, and it can be painful or pleasant, but it all has its effect. So the degree to which the mind is attached and identified with any particular pattern of experience, that's what contributes to the wave, that sense of me-ness, I-ness, and mine-ness. And so again, this might be a little bit hard to get the mind around, but the very simple answer to what is reborn, if all things are not self, is habits. That's kind of the one word answer to the theme for today. Habits what get reborn. Habits pertaining to our actions, also what is habitually present or familiar to us, whether we like it or we don't like it, or it's just a neutral presence. That's what the mind latches onto, and again, that's the image of the forest fire. The fuel is craving, or that clinging, that grasping, that quality of identification, that sense of I and me and mine. Ownership is what conditions the rebirth, or the kind of rebirth, how things reappear. And so in terms of spiritual practice, we, in the Buddhist way, the aim is to not be reborn, to not be feeding those habits of attachment, not identification. And so that can seem like a kind of death wish or a nihilistic point of view, but rather it's like saying, well, it's not so much a death wish or a nihilistic attitude at all. It's rather like, again, if you're standing on the beach looking out at the ocean, it's rather like taking in with a heart that is open and filled with wonder, taking in the magnificence and vastness of the great ocean, rather than fixating on a particular wave. That this is who and what I am. So that image, I feel, is good to bear in mind. That sometimes when we talk about ending rebirth or not being born again, it can seem like, oh, that's very nihilistic or kind of anti-life or rejecting nature, rejecting life, and a kind of aversive. But rather like, again, if using that image of standing on the shore, and the Buddha used this same kind of language when describing his own being, his own nature, he said again in another dialogue with Vacchagotta, this one's from the middle-length discourses, sutta number 72, the discourse on Vacchagotta and fire. Then Vacchagotta has asked him the question, when the life of an enlightened being comes to its end, when an enlightened being passes away, where do they reappear? What kind of realm do they reappear in? Some sort of super heaven, or where do they reappear? And the Buddha says, reappear doesn't apply, Vaccha. That's the kind of wrong word. And then Vacchagotta says, well, do they not reappear? Do they vanish altogether? Are they annihilated? And the Buddha says, does not reappear. That doesn't apply either. So Vacchagotta, trying to cover all bases, he says, well, do they both reappear and not reappear? Very thorough philosopher. The Buddha said, no, both reappear and not reappear. That doesn't apply. And to complete the whole picture, he says, okay, do they neither reappear nor not reappear? The Buddha said, nope. We didn't say nope, but that doesn't apply either. So Vacchagotta said, oh, this is really confusing. One of those must be it. There has to be a way that surely that covers all the bases. And then, and I quote this very many times, it's one of my favorite suttas of the whole Pali Canon. And the Buddha said, so Vaccha, you're asking the question in a way that presumes a reality that doesn't exist. So for example, if we had a little fire burning here, made out of grass and sticks, it's burning, and then we let the fire go out, and I ask you the question, where did the fire go, Vaccha? North, south, east, or west? How would you reply? And Vacchagotta says, I'd say it doesn't apply. It didn't go north, south, east, or west. It just went out. And the Buddha said, exactly. The way we put the question presumes a reality that doesn't exist. So reappear doesn't apply, doesn't reappear doesn't apply. Both and doesn't apply, and neither nor. Those don't apply, because using the language of being, going, a place, all of these don't apply in the reality of things. And so then he goes on to explain, and it's one of the rare instances where the Buddha talks about his own nature, his own quality of being. And he says to Vacchagotta, so that material form, that aspect of the physical world, of the body, whereby somebody trying to describe the Tathagata, the Buddha, would describe him, that has been cut off at the root, made like a palm tree stump, deprived of the conditions for existence, and been rendered incapable of arising in the future. So too with feelings, Vedana, perceptions, sanya, sankhara, mental formations, and discriminative consciousness. Everything that we think of as the body and mind, that's been completely let go of. Completely, there's no identification, no grasping, no clinging. But they're having a dialogue. They're both sitting down together talking. And the Buddha's saying, that which you would, in the ordinary terms of body and mind, that you tried to define what this is, all that's been completely let go of. And then he goes on to say, the Tathagata, the Buddha, is liberated from being reckoned in terms of the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness. He is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the great ocean. So again, standing on the seashore, looking out over the great water, then the mind goes to a state of wonderment. There's an openness. You can't see below the surface. The water stretches to the horizon. There's a vastness and a sense of mystery. It's powerful, it's present. You can't see what's below the surface, and it's limitless. So that's how the Buddha describes his own nature, like that experience of being open to the nature of the ocean, profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the great ocean. So that quality of presence is here. It's knowable, but you can't define it in the ordinary terms of the body and mind as we think of whom, what we are. So the Buddha's let go of those, is representing that mind which has completely let go of those personal qualities and it's completely awake to its own fundamental reality, which is timeless, unborn, undying, limitless. So so hopefully that comes across. So when we talk about what's reborn, habits, what we love, what we hate, what we fear, what is familiar. That's where the mind so takes root, or where that's the causes for that rebirth, or the attachment to those particular forms. So, and going back to karma and vipaka, action and its results, for a little bit again. There's a lot of superstition that takes form around karma, and it's very common, again, not just in Asia, but in the West. You have this sense of people experiencing certain things because of their karma, and there can be a very fatalistic or deterministic attitude that when someone's born into a rich family, so because of people say, oh, it's because of the good karma in their past lifetime, or that they have some kind of a lot of bad luck, or a lot of difficulties in their life. They say, oh, it's because of your bad karma in a past lifetime. So it's quite common for there to be a very deterministic and sort of fixed idea in that, and both in human societies all around the world, and so apparently even in the Bible, they tried to trim out that the sort of cosmology of past lives and present and future lives from the Bible, but they didn't manage to remove all references. So there's, I believe, somewhere in the New Testament, it's someone who's born blind. Jesus is asked the question: was it because of something they did in this life or in a previous life that they're born blind? So there was that was part of the biblical field of understanding as well. Anyway, it can be very deterministic, and I feel it's helpful to be familiar with how the Buddha spoke about these areas. And again, I would say that it's the significant thing, or most significant thing, is there's no fixed karma. It's not absolutely rigid or determined. There's tendencies and causal relationships. So that you have a pair of suttas, two suttas, side by side in the middle length discourses. The lesser discourse on the exposition of action, and the greater discourse on the exposition of action. The Chula Kamma Vibhanga Sutta and the Maha Kamma Vibhanga Sutta. They're number 135 and 136, side by side. So the lesser, there's a very direct sort of patterns are spelled out. So if somebody is stingy and selfish in a lifetime, then in a future lifetime they will be physically very unattractive. Or if someone kills a lot of animals, kills other people, kills other beings, in a lifetime they have a short life, that'll lead to them having a short lifespan. And so much of that sutta is kind of drawing those parallels, because of this cause there's this effect, and the effect matches the cause in quite a direct way. So you might think, well, that just contradicts what you were saying, Ajahn. But it does sort of line up. Okay, this is the cause, this is the effect. But I think it's a very definite editorial choice to put these two suttas side by side, because it's the Mahakamma Vibhanga Sutta, the greater discourse on the causes on action. What the Buddha spells out is you can't predict exactly how, where, and when, and in what form that the results of particular actions will take shape. So it might be this lifetime, it might be in the next few minutes, it might be in many lifetimes in the future, it might be extremely remote from ages and ages, eons and eons away. You can't pin down exactly what shape the karmic results will form in, or where, or when, or exactly how. So it's yes, there will be a result, but whether it's a strong result or a weak result, and exactly where, when, and how, it can't be defined. So there's an uncertainty. There's an openness in that, and I feel it's very, very, very skillful that those two suttas are side by side. They're saying yes, there is a relationship, but no, you can't predict or determine exactly how things will take shape. Though there's also a very significant teaching in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses. It's in the Book of the Threes, And in the Bhikkhu Bodhi translation, it's Sutta number 100, so Book of the Threes, Sutta number 100, and it's called the lump of salt. And again, it's speaking about the results of action and choices. To say, well, if a person acts in this way, is it a fixed result? And the Buddha is saying, well, someone's asking this kind of question, and he said, well, if you take a lump of salt, like a Himalayan rock salt, and you just have a bowl of water, and you put that lump of salt into a single bowl of water, and then it dissolves, then what's the result going to be? Will the water be will it be salty? Will it taste salty? Well, yes, it will, because it's not much water and a lot of salt, so it'll be really salty. And the Buddha said, well, if you take the same lump of salt and you put it into the river Ganges, will the river Ganges taste salty? Well, no, it won't, because the river is vast and flowing, so there will be completely negligible effect. And the Buddha said, exactly. So if the same action, if an action is taken by someone who has very very little virtue, very little spiritual qualities, who has not created a lot of wholesome qualities in their life, in their world, then a negative action, a destructive action, will have a powerful effect, will have a strong result. But if they have created a lot of goodness, if they created a great deal of benefit, if they've developed spiritually to a great degree, that same action will have a very small effect. And then a very good example of that is Angulimala, who was a mass murderer, a bandit who killed many people. But he, having met the Buddha, then he gave up his violent ways and took up the monastic life. But still, the results of his actions had not run out. So he, and it doesn't specify in the sutta exactly how, but he says, it describes how he came back from his arms round and his bowl is broken and his head is bleeding and his robes are torn, and whether it's people throwing rocks at him, the family members of the people he killed, or also other commentaries say, well, branches would just sort of drop off a tree and land on him, or he'd walk past a building and a tile would drop off a roof and come knock him on the head. That's sort of what seemed like accidents, or people attacking him. And the Buddha says to him, as he sees his bowl broken, his robes torn, his head cut, and so on, he says, bear it, Angulimala. You're experiencing the results now in a very mild form that had you not gone into monastic life and trained yourself spiritually, you would have been experiencing for many thousands of years, many hundreds of thousands of years in painful realms of existence. So you're getting the mild dose on account of you really working hard to develop your spiritual qualities. So again, I know some people don't like the idea of past lives and future lives, and that's sort of, there is a view that the Buddha never really taught that, or that's just symbolic, or that's just figures of speech. But to me, if you look at the number of references and also how well that fits with the whole Buddhist philosophy, I personally feel that that doesn't hold much water as an idea. That what we have in the Buddha's teaching is, say, clearly representing that there's a succession of lifetimes that beings experience, and one lifetime will condition another until there's a quality of full awakening and enlightenment, and then there's the causes for rebirth of attachment, identification have run out completely. So one of the things that I brought a little sort of show and tell along today, because this is another one of my favorite books. This is called The Mountains of Tibet, and I feel that this it's a children's book, but it represents very, very well how I see this process of rebirth, of punabhava, occurring. And again, it might seem pedantic to say the Buddha taught not self, he didn't teach no self. It's also often when you talk to us monastics or Buddhist teachers, we say, well, the Buddha didn't teach reincarnation, he taught rebirth. You thought, well, what's the difference? Like, no self, not self, isn't that the same thing? Reincarnation, rebirth, isn't that the same thing? But To be pedantic? No, it's not. It's not the same thing. So when we use the word rebirth, punabhava, because the idea of reincarnation is based on the within the Vedic tradition, the Hindu world, the idea that there's an Atman, a kind of bubble of selfhood, kind of the Atman, the true self or the real self. There's this bubble of me-ness, which is the true me, the real Atta, that goes from one life to another, inhabits one body after another, up in the heavenly realm or in the animal realm, the human realm, and that bubble of me-ness sort of occupies, it reincarnates. The karna is the physical form, like not carnation as in the flower, but carnal as in flesh, or as in the physical body. So it reincarnates. So there's that single body of selfhood moves from one life to another, and so that is not what the Buddha was teaching. It was not that was a philosophy that he didn't agree with. And rather, he said, there is the quality of awareness. There is this element of awareness which it knows this life, which is experiencing this present reality. But that this quality which knows, this awareness, isn't a self, doesn't belong to a self. So this is why we talk about anatta, not self. But also we talk about rebirth, or rather than reincarnation, because there's the experience, there's the knowing of one thing conditioning another, one day conditioning another, one lifetime conditioning another. But you can't say that it's this one single bubble of selfhood going from one life to another. There's an awareness, there's knowing, like the Buddha talking about his own nature. There is the Tathagata, the awake, aware quality, but you can't define that as a person. You can't define that as an individual. As he said, that material form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, whereby anyone trying to define the Tathagata would define him, that's all been completely let go of. That awake, aware principle can't be defined, can't be measured in terms of the body and the personality, in terms of the five khandhas. So in this little book, The Mountains of Tibet by Mordecai Gerstein, very beautiful illustrations as well, very nicely illustrated. It starts off, just by giving you a pocket version. So once upon a time, there was a little boy who lived in the mountains of Tibet, and his favorite thing to do was to go out onto the mountainside and fly his kite. And then it says here, the little boy grew up, and rather like that Pixar movie Up, where the central character of the film dies about 3 minutes into the film. The hero of this story dies on page 6. So the little boy grew up, never managed to travel much outside his favorite valley. Then he grew old and died. Okay, we're on page 6, and he's dead already. So then it says when this little boy died, or this old man died, then this had this vision of the vast open space, and this voice appears in the mind of that being who just passed away, saying, "So you have a choice. You can either go off into the great void and the heavenly worlds, or you can choose to reappear, to be born in the material world again. What would you like to do?" And they thought, well, I think I'd like to come back into the world again. So then there's visions of all the galaxies and different star formations around the universe. And well, all these different galaxies you can choose from. Which one would you like to appear in? Or that one with the kind of spiral shape. That's really nice. That looks nice. I'll go there. And well, where on the spiral would you like to go? Oh, about kind of 2/3, 3/4 of the way out. That looks like a nice spot. Not at the edge, not in the middle, just about there. It looks good. And then okay, there's a big golden sun, and then there are these 9 planets. Some of them red, some of them blue, some of them green and blue. Some of them small, some of them large. Some of them with lots of clouds and very stripy. Some with rings around them. Which one would you like? Oh, the blue and green one. The third one out. That looks nice. That looks like a nice place. Then the vision of the world appears. There's all kinds of places. Places in on the land. There's water. There's high places, low places. which kind of place would you like to appear? Oh, that one with the sticky out bits with the white stuff on top. That looks really nice. I'd like to go there. And okay. And so there's many different kinds of forms that you could take. You could have 4 legs or 2 legs or no legs or how many legs. Could be all sorts of different colors. Oh, I kind of the 2-legged ones look interesting. I like to be a 2-legged person. And you turn the page, and then once upon a time, a little girl lived in the mountains of Tibet, and she liked it. Her favorite thing to do was to fly a kite on the mountainside. So that I feel that's kind of how it works in my reckoning of things. That just without so deliberate, clear, conscious choice, we kind of keep getting drawn to the same habits, the same patterns. How many? I mean, as a monastic, we only have one kind of wardrobe. We always wear the same things. But how many of us sort of go to our cupboards or to our drawers and decide, I'll wear something completely different I'd never worn before. No, we just say, okay, I'm going to the monastery, I'll just wear my favorite. Weather's getting autumnal, I'll get my autumn jacket out. These are my favorite socks. So, we go to our familiar clothes. We don't just go to a completely different place. We don't just avoid the people that we know. We sit next to the people that we know. We wear the clothes that are familiar. We go to the places where we feel there's at home, where we find kind of value and meaning. So we tend to keep repeating the same patterns. A little bit of variation, and not with a great deal of deliberate thought. We just get drawn to the same patterns and motions over and over again. So that I feel that the more that we look at how this works, we don't have to reject the patterns that we follow. Like suddenly, Ajahn Amaro is completely right. I always wear grey and yellow. I think purple and pink. Let's do purple and pink instead. I'm so stuck. I need more purple. Or beige. Everything. I've got too much purple and pink in my life. Beige. I need beige. Just something non-colors. That's what I need. So we don't have to reject our habits, or the voice that we speak with, the people that we sit next to. I'm too attached to being close to my friends. I'm going to go and sit on the opposite side of the hall. No, we don't need to do that. But recognizing, I like to sit at the back, or I like to be close to the door, or to the pillar, or I like to be at the front. Okay, you can notice that, and then noticing the patterns that are there. And the last thing I'd like to share, because also it's speaking of the Tibetan tradition, particularly amongst spiritually developed beings, there's a habit or a custom, or spoken about, the deliberate rebirth, like choosing where to be reborn. So some people think, well, that's just a Tibetan thing. Talk about Rinpoche's sort of being born in this place or that place, or leaving a letter, kind of very neat. So you leave a sort of forwarding address when you pass away. I'm going to appear in this house with a blue roof next to the lake, with a mountain with a double peak to the south. So I think, well, that's a Tibetan thing. But you actually have very similar teachings in the Pali. Sutta number 120 in the Pali Canon is called, in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Pali Canon, is called Reappearance Through Aspiration. And it talks about, if your life is coming to an end, you can set a direction and choose to be reborn in particular realms. But rather like any kind of ticket, you need to have the some cash on your card. That if you haven't got the wherewithal to pay for the ticket, it's not going to work out. So that but if there is sufficient paramita, sufficient sort of karmic backup, then setting your mind on a place to reappear. Again, if you look at Sutta 120 in the middle length discourses, you'll find that reappearance through aspiration. But a partner to that, I think, well, that sounds great. But a partner to that is in the Book of the Eights, in the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses, Sutta number 35. I looked it up for today. Sutta number 35, it makes it very clear. It says, this works for the virtuous, not for the unvirtuous. Like, you do have to have cash on your card to carry this out. It's not just wishful thinking. Like, well, I'll just live a heedless and indulgent life, and as long as I've got that thought in mind, like Brahma world, or to see to heaven, or that's you got to have the spiritual paramita, the backup. So Sutta number 35 in the Book of the Eights says this is for the virtuous, not for the unvirtuous, because one who has spiritually developed themselves, then the Buddha says their intention succeeds, their intention bears fruit on account of their spiritual qualities, their virtue, because of you've got the cash in the account, therefore your aspiration can be fulfilled. It might sound very materialistic, but that's how it's described. It's like if there's the spiritual backup, the wherewithal, then that intention can bear fruit. So that if there's a sense of a good place to reappear is there, then the intention can be set. But again, that the encouragement and the greatest, say, motivation within the Buddha's teaching is to not be reborn at all. But the most perfect way of fulfilling our human potential is for that rebirth process to come to its end, and so that then the ultimate reality of Dhamma can be fully realized, and that rebirth based on craving and attachment, identification, comes to an end, and that there is, as the Buddha said, one who has reached the end has no criterion by which they can be measured. But he does say that ending, what happens to an enlightened being at the passing away of the body. The kind of one place in the Pali Canon where he talks about it was when his disciple Dabba the Malian passed away. He said, just like when a piece of hot iron fades, you can't say where the glow has gone to. You can't describe the destination of one who is fully enlightened when the body's passed away, but you can say that they have realized unutterable bliss. That's the one place in the Pali Canon, the description of Dabba the Malian's passing away. You get some small gesture. The Buddha says, unutterable bliss. That's as much as you get. But it doesn't speak in terms of a place or a form or time or identity, but just that it is can't be described, but it is something that is a quality that is unutterably blissful. So I'll leave my reflections there for this afternoon. Please help yourselves to some refreshments, and then we can gather back at about 3:20. We have a couple of microphones there, so anybody who has a question, please do pick up one of those so that then everyone can hear the question. And anything that would be good to clarify, or anything that was needs. Yes, please take the magic wand.
Just a request. Is there any good advice you can give about breaking bad habits?
Well, this is Amaravati is a kind of bad habit breaking machine. So ideally, that's what monasteries are for, and meditation retreats, listening to Dhamma teachings. There's many different dimensions. It's interesting within the Pali Canon and Theravada tradition, there's many lists, and one of the most helpful lists is the qualities that are directly supportive of the development of insight, liberating insight. And the first one in that list of 4 is drawing close to good people, Sapurisa Sangseva, which is a very long Pali word. So Sapurisa, Purisa is a person, Sat means true or good or worthy, Sangseva is to associate with, to draw close to. So in terms of breaking bad habits, draw close to good people, not just in the social sphere, but also drawing close to nowadays in terms of what we look at, what we listen to in the media, what we bring deliberately into our field of awareness, who we hang out with in the physical world, but also who we hang out with in the kind of digital world as well. So that's the first one, is drawing close to good people. And when I've emphasized this, the people will say, "Yeah, Ajahn, but you don't know my family," or I've got a problem with that in the workplace. I'd love to draw close to good people, but yeah. So that being understood, that sometimes our living situation or work situation, can be some very challenging folks to be around, or that have attitudes or ways of speaking and acting that are less than helpful. But even within these spheres of, like, with the family or the workplace and society, there's a certain degree of choice that we do have. Who do we incline to being close to? Whose advice do we follow? Who do we look up to? Who do we admire? So that consciously drawing close to helpful influences in the people that we pay attention to or draw close to. So that's the first one. Second one is listening to useful teachings, good teachings. So I would suggest choosing to spend an afternoon, not just listening to me, but choosing to spend an afternoon on the weekend coming to a place like Amaravati to listen to spiritual teachings and to incline towards hearing things and digesting, taking in things that are going to lead towards peace and clarity and benefit within our lives. So paying attention to good teachings, Saddhamma Savana is the Pali for that. Then the third one on the list is wise reflection, yoniso manasikara. So breaking bad habits, so it's in a sense reflecting on what those habits are. What do I do that is destructive? Where does that come from? What's the cause of this? What makes it easier to follow the bad habit? What makes it harder to follow the bad habit? Where do I get lost? So wise reflection is not just proliferating mentally about things or just conceptualizing, but using the ability of the mind to recognize patterns. So that's what really makes it reflective thinking. It's like, how does this work? What are the causes of this, and what ways can be followed that make things easier or better? So that wise reflection is, in a sense, taking a step back from what we experience, how our life is, and the choices that we have made and do make, to look to see if we can recognize those patterns of how it works. So the kind of causal relationships and interconnections of the different aspects of our life. So if I spend time with this person, then it ends up in a sort of a tangled mess. If I choose to spend time with these other people, then things lead to more peacefulness and clarity. Okay, let's recognize that pattern and learn from it. And so that wise reflection is a significant part. And then the last one is quite subtle, and that is practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. And so that can sound a little bit esoteric. But what that means is that often when we make spiritual efforts, or we want to give our life a particular direction, we make it very personal, like I was saying at the beginning of the talk. It's like, I should do this, I shouldn't do that, I'm doing that wrong, I shouldn't do that, I should do this instead. And on one level that seems, well, yeah, it sounds quite sensible. But the more that the practice of the spiritual path is cast into the framework of me and mine, I am like this, I've got to get rid of this bad habit, I've got to develop this good habit, and then I will become a peaceful, happy person off in the future. That it sounds great, but if we put everything into the paradigm of me and time and what I've got, what I need to get rid of, what I need to become, then that very selfing, that sort of the way of creating a framework of selfhood, that becomes an obstruction, and so to make it less personal, to say, well, this is unwholesome, and if it's followed, then it leads to painful situations, rather than I've got this bad habit, I need to get rid of it. Right? That having been followed, what's the result? Ouch. This having been followed, what's the result? Oh, very good. So there's the recognition of how nature works and the patterns that can be followed, but not casting it into that framework of I and me and mine. So many years ago, Ajahn Amaro used to describe this as changing the paradigm from me and my problems to the awake mind seeing the way things are. So that on an ordinary worldly level, you can say, yeah, I've got some problems, and it would be good if I got rid of them, of the sort of worldly way of it, just as a figure of speech. But if internally, rather than there's a separate individual me who's a genuine owner of this problematic behavior, just that here's a pattern of behavior that arises. It can be followed or it cannot be followed. It's not a person, doesn't belong to a person. Then you're acknowledging the habit or the pattern that's there, but it's not being turned into something that's me and mine. So those four, the drawing close to good people, listening to good teachings, wise reflection, and then practicing based on mindfulness and wisdom rather than on self-view. Those are I would say, the key ways of breaking bad habits. I mean, it could be a subject for a whole hour-long Dhamma talk, but that's a short version. So please, any other questions? Don't be shy. Go ahead.
Sorry.
You can, go ahead. Yeah, you can go afterwards.
Thank you, Ajahn. Could you talk a little bit about agency or lack of it? You touched on this earlier. My question is, if you look at
could you speak a little closer to the microphone?
Sure.
Yeah, very good.
Perfect. If you look at any decisions we make or any actions we take, we can always track back through the causal chain and always to something that happens outside of your control. So how would you then, you can conceptually look at it almost like a random process, but you touched on it and Lord Buddha said, well, actually it's not completely random. So like your question about, so what is it reborn? So the question is, well, what is making the right effort or who is making the right effort? I always found this quite confusing.
Again, you're not the first person to ask that question about agency and who is it that decides. Yeah, but again, I would say that's a wrong question. And in one of the books I did recently, there's a little section called "The Anatomy of a Decision," where I sort of walk through it. So that, especially with the area of action, deliberate action, intended action, and then the results of that action, it really seems like there's a me who's deciding and a me who's receiving the results of that decision. And again, on a worldly level, we say, I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma. So that's where we start from the position of self-view, a kind of a worldly languaging of things. But if in terms of deconstructing a decision, and where it looks like there is a me who's deciding, then say there's like this very moment, there's the having heard a question, there's the comprehension of the meaning of the question, voiced in English language. There's then, so that hearing is not self, the drawing upon memory of how this question has been processed and understood in the past, so memory, sanya, is not self. Then amongst those memories and thoughts, there is a recognition of this memory applies, this memory doesn't apply. Again, that perception, sanya, anatta, perception is not self. And then that recognition of that perception, that those words, that way of speaking, that is a fit for this question. And so that is, again, not a personal thing. It's just recognizing how like how the pegs fit into the oak beams. It's like it's not a personal thing. That's the hole. That's the peg. They fit each other. It's a recognition of how things function according to a natural order, and then the capacity to draw upon those memories and turn them into speech or those perceptions. That capacity is also part of a natural function. It's not a person. Doesn't belong to a person, and then forming into these words that are then expressed. Then hearing. Sotang, it's just ear consciousness, mano vijnana, mind consciousness. Those are all aspects of nature that arise and pass away. So when you deconstruct the decision and the results of that decision, every element of it is not a person, doesn't belong to a person. You put it all together, and it's like, I decided to use these words and explain this point in this way. So that, again, I think... It in a way, when we develop insight meditation, vipassana meditation, then initially like hearing a sound like of a bird or a car passing by, it can be recognized, oh, that sound is not self. There's a hearing of it, but it doesn't have an owner. But then a sensation in the body that we can really feel, well, that sound is not self, but ow, my knees hurt. Well, that's a feeling. A sensation, but that which knows the feeling, is that a person? Does that belong to a person? The feeling arises and passes away. And again, the applying vipassana meditation is, well, there's a knowing of that painful feeling, but it in itself is changing, unsatisfactory, and not who and what I am. Then that process of meditation and thinking. So this thought of recognizing that's not, that feeling is not self. Then that thought, does that have an owner? Is that me and mine? And so then it can be recognized, that thought just arises, passes away. That thought is also anicca, dukkha, anatta. So below perception, below feeling, below sensation, below thought, and emotion, like, oh wow, I'm really getting the hang of this. This is great. My practice is really developing. I'm so happy. And emotion can feel like, oh, but I am happy. Well, this issue is aware of happiness. Is that a person? Does that belong to a person? So emotion can feel very much like who and what we are. But then I would say even beyond emotion or deeper than emotion, decisions, choices really feel like there's a me. And the laws of most countries revolve around this person made that choice. They are innocent, they walk free from the court. This person made that choice, they're going to jail because they're guilty. Societies function a lot around choice and personality. But when it's deconstructed and it's looked at in its essence, then even decision-making is not self. It looks like it's a person, but from the outside, like the Buddha choosing to teach. It looked like the awakened being under the Bodhi tree was inspired, encouraged to teach, and so he taught for 45 years. But if that's, again, deconstructed and you look at the consistent elements, it's the awake mind responding to the conditions of the present. And as the Buddha said, the form, feeling, perception, mental formations or consciousness by one the one trying to describe the Tathagata would describe him, that's all been completely let go of. So it looks like a person, the Buddha looked like a person from the outside, but from the inside, there's no identification with any personal quality. So I'd say this is like the real core of insight meditation, is revealing that the appearance of our experiences, our sense of agency, me choosing to listen to a Dhamma talk, or me, and that through that exploring, that investigating, realizing, oh, this which knows the person is not a person. Oh, and that's profoundly liberating. Does that make sense? So our friend there with the purple jackets.
You need to meditate to get into sustainable good actions, or maybe what is the relationship of meditation and what actions you attract to your life?
It completely depends on the conditioning of this life, I would say. It's, say, I was mentioning Dabba, the Malian, Dabba Maliputta. So he was a student of the Buddha. So he is famous for when he was a 7-year-old novice, as the razor touched his head to begin shaving his head, he realized complete enlightenment. So he didn't need much. Just like the razor touching the first hairs, okay, that's it. So that's kind of one end of the spectrum. And more often it takes a lot of sustained effort and commitment. So it really does vary from one life to another, and you can't really predict. Sometimes insight comes very quickly. Sometimes it's very slow. Sometimes it's quick but challenging. Sometimes it's slow but easy, or slow and difficult, or quick and easy. It can vary a lot. So there are not any kind of universal measures that apply to every person, every life. But I would say that the important thing is, again, sort of drawing close to good people, recognizing the genuine benefit of meditation, and also as changes do occur within the mind and things do improve, and there's a greater degree of clarity or adaptability, then to notice that, not just to let the attention dwell upon the distance that's still got to be covered, or the things that are still out of balance, but rather to also look at what has been learned, what good qualities have been developed, and then that just patiently, steadily heading in a skillful direction, cultivating what's wholesome, beneficial, and just taking one step at a time, just taking each step. But also it's easy to dwell upon the things, the work that's still left to do, or our perceived inadequacies or unskillful habits, and to not really appreciate that we might have developed a lot of very beneficial qualities over a long time, but we are ignoring that and just focusing on the obstructions or difficulties. Does that make sense? Yeah. So anybody over this side? Don't want to ignore the folks over here. Yes, if you can use the microphone.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, Ajahn. I'm trying to reconcile the understanding of the process of rebirth. Sometimes when we read I've read some other writings, the term consciousness comes about, right? And you mentioned about habits that is being the next process of the rebirth. And also, if I remember correctly, also in some suttas, the term Gandhabba came about during the process of rebirth. I'm trying to reconcile all this. So maybe Ajahn can just share how do we understand better these terms that comes about in the suttas. Thank you.
So again, this is not an uncommon question. So the word consciousness has quite a variety of meanings, and so different people use it in different ways. So in some texts, they talk about a relinking consciousness or a rebirth consciousness. And the word Gandhabba that you're describing, that say in some discourses, then say like the greater discourse on causation, the Mahanidana Sutta, then it's spoken of the Gandhabba, the consciousness entering into the womb for the next birth. So it's also, Gandhabba it means a celestial musician, like the Gandharvas in Sanskrit, or Gandhabba. So it's particular beings of one of the heavenly realms, the Chatu Maharajika Deva realm. So it can be confusing. It's like, why are these musicians involved in the rebirth process? What happened there? So it's just the use of the same word for two quite different meanings. I don't know how Gandhava as the celestial musician and Gandhava as a sort of rebirth consciousness got conflated, but that's somehow that happened along the way. So anyway, that way of I think that dialogue between the Buddha and Vacchagotta about the forest fire, saying, what is the fuel, what sustains a being from one life to the next? That you could say that tanupadana, craving, is the fuel. That is what's called the Gandhava is describing that kind of consciousness locked onto a particular set of objects, like identification with being a male, or identification with being having a particular nationality, being British, or being of a particular faith, or the mind locks on, or that you are locked onto a particular resentment, like, well, even though I'm dying, I'm still not going to forgive him. I won't. Boop. Then the mind is sort of latched onto a thought and is kind of basically giving that thought a false substantiality, or that I'm so grateful, that because of the kind of wonderful blessings I got from my parents, that I'm so happy, I'm so grateful, and then pop, the mind is locked onto those beings that were a source of great blessing, great good fortune. So whether it's pleasant, painful, or neutral, wholesome, unwholesome, or neutral, when we talk about consciousness or rebirth consciousness, I'd say it's the degree to which the attention has locked onto particular conditions. So functional familiarity, like a particular smell or sound, like that little, the mountains of Tibet story, like, ooh, those pointy bits with the white stuff on top, they look nice. Like that sort of unconscious appeal of certain forms or smells or tastes or sounds. So that what you do have in the Pali Canon is that it's not entirely logical and systematic. It's a kind of collage. In texts like the Abhidhamma, they try to sort of line everything up and put everything in boxes and make it all completely logical, but life is not logical in that respect. It's messy. It's blurry. So what we have in the Pali Canon is a collage, and similarly with the different teachings of the expressions in Myanmar or Sri Lanka or Thailand or Laos or Cambodia, India, there will be different ways of expression. Different teachers will have different themes that they favor, and so they can seem contradictory. So along with defining terms, then I would say, as a sort of what the dictionary tells you, also what's very helpful in our lives is say, well, okay, that's what Ajahn Amaro said. So how does that match on to my experience? What makes this sense of me carry on from today to tomorrow? What was the me that was yesterday that I liked or disliked, or this particular thing that was familiar? How is that linked to what's present here now? So you're matching the words that you're learning and the meaning onto your direct experience. And in that, sometimes we'll come across a term or a concept that you go, wow, what on earth does that mean? And like with dependent origination, I had that a lot. I could see feeling and craving. Okay, right. That I can I can see that bit. Well, much of the rest is like, what is all that about? How does that work? So when I first came across those teachings, most of it was mysterious. But then over time, you slowly get a bit of a feeling for how things work. So that sense of matching the concepts onto your own experience, but not being afraid of coming across mysteries and inexplicable things like, well, what is that about? Well, that is not clear at all. That doesn't make sense to not feel you have to figure it out or come to a conceptual conclusion, but just, well, that area, that's blurry. It just doesn't make sense. Okay, just park that for the time being, keep being interested and keep looking, and then maybe things will get clearer later on. So there was another, yes.
Hello, Ajahn. The amount of, the amount that the Buddha has like parted with us is like staggering. Okay, I've been studying for quite a long time, and it just still blows my mind. Some of these concepts, and do we know specifically that it was the Buddha that has imparted all this wisdom to us, or is there a possibility that there were many Buddhas that have been involved, or people that have been involved in some of this? Because I know that the Pali Canon is the words of the Buddha, right? What do we know about his life?
There are also within the Pali Canon you have teachings by other monastics. You have some teachings by lay people in there. So of what they call 84,000 units of Dhamma, I think 82,000 were spoken by the Buddha, 1,500 by other monastics, and 500 by lay people, something like that. So, but I think in terms of your question, because these texts were first sort of collated about 2,600 years ago, it was still the Iron Age here in what we now call Hertfordshire. It was like 400 years before the Romans arrived that the Buddha was speaking. So it was a long time ago. So within that period, also the teachings were passed on by rote learning. So the repetitive quality that you have in the scriptures, Pali scriptures, no one's, well, maybe some people are, but you can't realistically consider that the Buddha spoke in that extremely systematic and repetitive way. That was a device that made it easier to memorize the teachings, because most people, there was no reading and writing except for a very small proportion of the population at that time. And so everything was passed on by rote learning. And so that, and so along the way, along with that stylization of much of the teaching, also necessarily things will have crept in or been edited out. I mean, well, like I was saying with the Bible, I think it was the Council of Nicaea, they edited out all of the references to rebirth, and they just missed a couple that they intended to take out, but they glossed over. That's what I understand in the biblical scholarship. So I think in the Pali Canon, certain things have been edited out, certain things have been patched in. But it's interesting that, to me, that a number of scholars have when this has been discussed, they say there's so much internal consistency in the voice, in the style, the use of analogies, the ordering of material, the basic consistency of the material throughout the sort of 40 volumes of the Pali Canon. It's basically, it's impossible to not acknowledge that the vast majority of this came from a single mind. That there's too much internal consistency. I mean, there's things that obviously stand out, where like certain words are used that didn't appear until 300 years later or 500 years later, and so they're clear interpolations, they're later arrivals. But as I understand it, a number of people who are experts in the field say, just if you look at the whole body of material, it hangs together too perfectly to have been coming from a whole mishmash of sources, and that there's an internal integration that really demonstrates that the vast majority is coming from one form of expression, one set of one imagination, one person. So yes. If you could...
I'd like to ask how best to respond to certain presentations of Buddhism that I've come across. What I'm thinking of is a presentation that goes like this. Oh, layperson, think about your afterlife more and put your mind on that, rather than thinking only of this life. And as part of that, notice that there are desirable and undesirable places to be in the afterlife. And that's used as a motivation to engage the worldly layperson in becoming interested in Buddhism. So my response to that is to notice that there's a complete acceptance of personality view.
Complete what?
That there's a complete acceptance of personality view there. How can the person to whom Buddhism is presented in this way best respond? Have I explained that enough?
No, I think that's clear enough. Yes. From my biased perspective, I would say the best way of responding is to say thank you for sharing. And that, if someone's making a presentation of a teaching or a point of view, that's our own teachers would say, you take in a teaching and you reflect upon it. And the principle of the Kalama Sutta is like you take it in, you listen to it, and then what's going to lead to benefit and harmony between yourself and others, take it and use it. What seems to be not of benefit or seems to be completely wrong, then leave it aside. So that rather than feeling you have to contend against something that's being said, take it in and then weigh it up within your own experience. And then what aspects of it seem to be beneficial, take them and use them. What isn't beneficial, like, says, well, that doesn't really make sense, or that goes against my understanding or the insight that's been experienced. So leave it aside. And so that the experience of the individual is the final arbiter of truth in Buddhist practice, not just accepting the words of an authority. So that there's a couple of encounters that you have in the scriptures that Ajahn Chah used to quote. He sort of put the stories together where the Buddha's giving a teaching, and I think it was at the Eastern Gatehouse monastery, and after he'd given this teaching, he said to Sariputta, who was sitting beside him, "Have you ever heard me give this teaching before?" And Sariputta says, "No, I haven't." And the Buddha says, "Yeah, I haven't heard it before either. It occurred to me as I was speaking." And then he said, "Well, do you believe it to be true?" And then Sariputta says, "Not yet." And it sounds like, you got the chief disciple sort of not relating respectfully to the great master, sitting side by side in front of the whole group of people. And then the Buddha says, "Well, why is that?" And then Sariputta says, "Because I haven't had the opportunity to I've only just heard it for the first time, so I haven't had the opportunity to test it out and see for myself." And the Buddha says, "Good, Sariputta, good. This is, even though you're my chief disciple and you have perfect faith in the Tathagata, even so, you shouldn't just believe something on hearing it. You should test it out and see for yourself." So Ajahn Chah would repeat that story over and over again. Like, don't just believe what I say. If you're a kind of convincing spiritual teacher and you can make a case for things, listen to it, test it out, see for yourself. So I would say when somebody presents something in that way and says, this good to aim for a particular rebirth as a layperson, so, well, thank you for sharing. And that they say, well, that's one perspective, and that person can promote that. That's their business. I don't have to accept that. I don't have to I don't have to fight against them or argue, but I can hear that and say, well, I'll test that out and see for myself. In another encounter that might be relevant to what you're asking, again, it's a dialogue that I like to quote quite often, and it's a relative of the Buddha called Mahanama, not the Bhikkhu Mahanama who was in the original group of five, but a cousin of the Buddha who was the ruler of the Sakyans. So the Buddha was back visiting Kapilavatthu, and this relative of his, Mahanama, said, I, as the sort of senior person in the Sakya kingdom, in the Kapilavatthu, I get invited to people's bedside when they're dying, and so people kind of expect me to give advice. And I don't know what to say. You're the great master. Please, can you give me some advice on what to say to people on the deathbed, because this happens. And then the Buddha gives this very interesting sort of sequence of pieces of advice. He says, well, first of all, ask them, are you worried about your property and your wealth? Or are you not? And if they say, yes, I'm worried about my property and my wealth, then you should say to them, well, whether you worry about your property or you don't worry about your property, you're going to die anyway. So better that you let go of worrying about your property and your wealth. Are you worrying about your family, your children, your grandchildren, your spouse, and your family members? And if they say, yes, I am, you say, well, whether you worry about them or you don't worry about them, you're going to die anyway. So it's not very cuddly. But it's quite blunt, but also quite helpful. Right? So whether you worry about them or not, you're going. So best to let go, to develop that non-attachment, non-clinging, non-grasping. So then he moves into a different mode. So then, if they are ready to let go of their family and their property and their business and all those concerns, then you should ask them, do you have an idea of where you want to reappear? And if they say they would like to reappear in the realm of the four guardian deities, the Chatumaharajika Devas, and say, well, why settle for being reborn in the Chatumaharajika heaven? Why not aim for the Tavatimsa heaven? If they say they want to aim for the Tavatimsa heaven, or the heaven of the 33, say, why not aim for the the heaven of the Yamadevas, and then so on and so forth, the Tusita Devas, and then through the different realms. Why settle for the Tusita heaven? Why not aim for the heaven of those who delight in the creations of others? And if they say they want to aim for that, say, well, why settle for that? Why not aim to be reborn in the Brahma world? And then, very interestingly, he says, if they say, I want to be reborn in the Brahma world, then you should say to them, well, why settle for being reborn in the Brahma world? Better it would be for you to focus the mind upon Sakaya Nirodha, the cessation of identity. And so, as you're saying about letting go of self-view, and it's, I think, maybe the only place in the Pali Canon where you get that term Sakaya Nirodha. So Sakaya Ditti means personality view, or the identification with the body and the personality. So Sakaya Nirodha is the cessation of self-view, the cessation of identity. And then he says, and such a one, a layperson whose mind is fixed on Sakaya Nirodha, there's no difference in their state of liberation than that of a monk who's been an arahant for 100 years. So it's one of the very few places in the Pali Canon where the Buddha talks about a layperson being totally enlightened. And then it's no small statement. Like, their state of liberation as a layperson on their deathbed is no different than a monastic who's been an arahant for 100 years. So that the Buddha said, far better to focus on that than reappearing in a different realm. So that is so the encouragement that he gave, or the advice he gave to Mahanama to say to people on their deathbed. So that's in the connected discourses on stream entry, I think. Anyway, you find that in the connected discourses. If you look up Mahanama in the index, you'll find that. I think it's either Sutta number 54 in chapter 55, or Sutta 55 in chapter 54. I can't remember which way around that is. But speaking of numbers, it's now 4:03, so let's draw things to a close for today. Go well.